Hi everyone. Hi and welcome to today's session, how to help your students meet their potential in their PTE General exam. Today we'll be hearing from Joanne Sale. Jo is Pearson English's Test Prep Product Manager for the PTE General and PTE Academic tests. Prior to joining Pearson, Jo lived and worked in Mexico for 15 years as a teacher trainer and editor, where she travelled extensively, learned Spanish and developed ELT and test prep materials for bilingual schools across primary and secondary levels. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We'll be having a short Q&A session towards the end of this webinar. So please do submit your questions into the questions box at any time during the talk. We'll try to get to as many as possible at the end. This session will be recorded and available shortly afterwards in case you would like to share it with your friends or colleagues or watch again. And now I'm very happy to pass over to Joanne.
Hi everybody, how are you today? Thanks for joining us. I'm really happy to be here to talk about this to you today, and I appreciate you're all very busy and this is taking some time out of your day to be here, so thank you very much for coming. I'm just going to ask you for 1 second because I'm having a bit of a technical problem and I'm just trying to see if I can share my screen with you. 1 second, please. Can you see my screen, Sophie?
I can. Yes, can see your first slide there.
Okay, great. Fantastic. So this is what we're going to be talking about today, everybody, how to help your students meet their potential in the PTE General test. First of all, a little introduction from me. So as Sophie said, I've been working in education for quite a long time. I'm currently working for Pearson as a product manager for test prep. I'm managing lots of things around the PTE General and PTE tests and courseware and things like that. So this is what we're going to talk about today. Oops, gone a little bit too fast. And these are the things that we're going to be looking at. So we're going to be talking about a blended approach to test prep and what that means. We'll be looking at digital test prep and student goals. We'll be talking about a little bit about flipping a test prep classroom and what that looks like. Then we'll move on to talk about online versus offline. What does this mean? What to do and when? We'll talk about skill focus in the digital classroom, and then finally look at very quickly at virtual feedback and assessment. So those are the things that we'll be going over. But first of all, I'd like to find out a little bit about you, about everybody who's here today, who you are, where you're from, and what kind of experience you have with teaching. So I'm going to ask you to type into the question chat box that you have there just a little bit of information. You don't even have to write a full sentence. Where do you teach? So do you teach at a private school? Do you teach at a secondary school? Do you teach at a university? And what kind of place do you teach? Do you teach online? And what is your experience with teaching online, if you have any? So if you could just write a few things down there, that would be good to start. Sophie, will I see those come up?
You should see them in the questions box. They're coming in now. Can you see those?
I'm just looking.
Need to kind of scroll down to see the the latest ones.
Yeah, they're not. I'm really sad because they're not showing up. I can't see them.
Are they not?
No. Can you tell us about any of the things people are typing?
Yeah, so we have people from all over Mexico, Ukraine, Poland. People are some working in secondary schools. Somebody administers exams. Junior high. Somebody teaches online. A real mix.
That's really great. So that's really good. We've got a lot of different experience here. So this is actually a bit of an interactive session. So I'll be asking you questions all the way through. So Sophie, as I can't seem to see them, I don't know if you could help me to ask questions just to give us a couple of results back. That would be really good. So glad to know we have people from all over. That's always really interesting. So let's get started then. We're going to talk about a blended approach to PTE General test prep. Why a blended approach? So we're going to talk about this all the way through this afternoon or this morning, many of you. And all of the things that we're going to talk about are just ideas. They're not the only way of doing things, but it's to give you an idea of perhaps teaching online and offline, some ways of getting started for how to think about it. So why a blended approach? Why could it be important? So in terms of PTE General, every student who takes a test will have very different reasons for taking the test itself. This is not unusual for any reason for learning English, right? But particularly for a test like PTE General, there's usually a very specific reason why people want to get that certification. So the reasons might be time goals for taking the test. They might be very, very different. Some people might have a lot of time to prepare it, and some people might get prepared and take the test very quickly. Obviously, very different preferences for way of studying. Some people might work well in classroom situations. Some people might work better online. Some people might prefer one-to-one instruction. We all know there's very different needs there. And also, as everybody knows nowadays, the most common one probably now, restrictions on study locations, right? We all know this is an issue, and maybe of you in your own teaching situations, maybe not quite sure how you're going to be teaching in the next school year. So this is something that hopefully we'll be able to address a little bit today with some ideas of how to approach it. So thinking about a blended approach to test prep, what can this include? Basically, it could be any combination of things that are online, things that are offline, self-study or face-to-face instruction. So we've got some ideas here. You could have, you know, a classroom there with lots of people who get to interact face-to-face. You may have a whole bunch of things like we have in the top right there. You may have print books and digital things and things that are online as well to access. It may just be a print situation if you're face-to-face. But most importantly, I think, throughout all of these different approaches and different materials that we might have, they do actually all need collaboration as a very important part of the teaching and the learning. And that's something that we're going to be looking at quite a lot today. So what could be the advantages of blended learning for test prep? Is it the same as learning for other English courses, or is it different in any way? So some of the advantages for test prep could be that the teacher planning, actually, even though it seems a lot more complicated, does allow teachers perhaps to focus on students' needs a little bit more. You're able to assign offline self-study tasks to students in a certain way that actually gives them more time and possibly more of a personalised focus than if they were in the classroom, right? We know that it's hard sometimes to have a lot of students face-to-face in the classroom and reach them all at once. So there's some advantages there to doing things online and having that self-study part of that. Secondly, you can help them with their learning pace. So we know for a fact from research at Pearson that 90% of test takers often really prefer online or digital test prep materials and courseware. We're not quite sure what the reasons are for this. I don't really know. We're not able to pinpoint exactly the reasons why, but it is something that we're seeing in our research. And the fact that you're able to do these things online and offline means that test prep preparation allows them extra time to study, as we've already said. And thirdly, digital learning offers lots of opportunities for other skill development that aren't only related to the test that they're studying for or the course or the level that they're trying to get to. So, for example, if you have things like speaking and listening skills that you need to work on with your students, you can, through digital learning, still have them focus a lot on things like turn taking, interjection, language of conversation, even though they're not face-to-face in the classroom. Actually, through digital and online learning, it's really easy to build in real-world practice with really authentic materials, which of course we know is vital to PTE General. That's what the tasks and the test is based on, right? It's good for collaborative exercises, and we'll look at that a little bit later as to how that might work. And online time and space has to be very focused, which is a good thing actually for test prep and for assessment, right? You need to be focused whenever you're learning anything in life, but in test prep, there's quite often a lot of detail and specific things that you need your students to look at. So in this sense, there are a lot of advantages for doing it digitally. So before we move on, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Practice Test Plus for PTE General. This is something that will be coming up in our session today, and this is the brand new courseware from Pearson for prepping for PTE General. They just launched this year in June. We have print and we have digital packages of this courseware available, and it covers the 4 levels that you see here from A2 through to C1. All of the books come along with an app for students to practice on. They have videos, there's lots of online resources, audio, things like that. So we'll go into a bit more detail about this later. This is a really good resource for this blended learning that we're going to be talking about. In terms of Practice Test Plus for PTE General, it does, as I said, have printed digital materials. It has all of these things, which of course relate to both of these situations at the bottom. So you have both a teacher in a classroom situation face-to-face, and you also have self-study or classroom study that is digital. Practice Test Plus has a very flexible design. It's not actually a course in a traditional sense. It's not, it doesn't follow a lesson plan or a lesson flow. It doesn't have a designated number of hours for you to cover the material. But it is very, very flexible. There's no one typical kind of user. Lots of people buy this courseware and study it on their own. Lots of people take it as part of classroom instruction. So it's very, very flexible content. And for our purposes today, for looking at blended learning, you can really mold it to use it in the way that you want to. It's divided into lots of sections with detailed guidance and tips. So you get a lot of extra information about how the exam works, how it's, and really get your students ready for it. It's ideal for different students, and as I've said, really, really adaptable. So let's go on to talk about digital test prep and student goals. And I know this is something really near and dear to all of your hearts. So again, I want to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, let's look at the first question, and if you could put your answers into the chat box. I'd like to ask you, what are your students' most common goals while studying for PTE General? So this is in terms of what they are studying, the skills that they are studying, not why they are taking the exam. So while they are studying, what kind of goals do they have usually? I'll give you a minute to put your answers into the chat box.
I think there's a little bit of a delay with the questions box. Here we go. University study and focusing on speaking, getting a certificate, how to use grammar structures correctly, showcasing proficiency, to get good grades, to be able to communicate when they finish their degree and get a job. To get used to the type of exercises, study abroad for university, scholarships to study grammar and speaking, to build their language skills and across all the 4 skills.
Okay, so already quite a lot of varied answers there. I think that responds to one of my earlier slides when we were talking about all these different reasons why people take the test, right? So that's great. In terms of what they study though, now let's look at the second question. What do they commonly need to focus on? So if you have many, many students that you're teaching or preparing for the PTE General exam, are there any certain things that you think they commonly need to focus on that come up as common things that students need to work on to prepare for the test? Put your answers into the chat box for me.
There seems to be a lot around speaking and writing.
Okay.
Yeah, speaking seems to be the most common one. Writing, then maybe listening next, preparing for interviews. discussion.
That sounds very familiar. Very common answers actually for this kind of question. So great, that's good to know. Let's carry on talking about this and see what else we can come up with. So, oops, sorry, going a bit far there. Blended teaching for test prep. What are some of the similarities between this and other things? So the individual needs and goals are key. If you're learning English for anything at all, and just to improve your English, you're taking a normal language course anywhere in the world, your individual needs and goals are key. That's the same whether you're just taking a regular English language course or whether you're preparing for a test like PTE General. It's always the same that teachers can't often teach students individually, as I said before. It's pretty similar that some students are more used to or more comfortable with online instruction. Any of you this year who've been perhaps thrown into more of a digital environment or have had to teach suddenly online, maybe when you didn't teach as much before online, will know that some of the students are a little bit more savvy and a little bit more comfortable with it than others, and sometimes teachers too, right? It's not easy, it takes some practice, and that's something that's common whatever kind of language course you're teaching. Goal-oriented instruction and learning are essential to meeting the goals. Very, very important, whatever course it is. And careful planning is needed for managing a large class. That's the same whether you're in a classroom situation or online. You need to plan carefully, and we know that. And also teachers need to find effective ways to assess progress and learning. This is a little bit more complicated in a digital blended way, but we'll look at ways that we can do that as well. So lots of ways that blended teaching for test prep is the same as teaching for other English language courses, but there's lots of differences as well. For example, the online classes and the digital tools. Technical problems can affect teaching and affect learning as well. I mean, you've seen me today. I think that I'm quite technologically savvy, but obviously anybody can have problems with it, right? Anything can happen. So this is something that's obviously a big difference. Blended teaching for test prep also implies that there's a lot of test specific knowledge that you need to teach. It's not like a general English course in that you do have to go into that drill down detail that I mentioned earlier, and that makes blended teaching a little bit more complicated as well. Not impossible, but it's a bit more challenging. Also the test strategies. Detailed test strategies might seem easier to teach in the classroom. This isn't actually strictly true, and we'll look at some of the materials that we have later that might help you to do this, but it does seem a little bit more challenging in the beginning. And effective feedback and assessment. We may need to plan these things, as we've already said, much more carefully in a non-classroom environment. So some things that are similar and some things that are not. Okay, let's look at flipping the test prep classroom. This is not a new idea, so I'm sure some of you will have heard of this before. It's not a new concept, but it is something that's very relevant to what we're talking about today. So flipping the classroom is where so normally in a traditional classroom you would have the teaching and a lot of the practice going on in the face-to-face classroom. Then the students would go home, do their homework, consolidate what they had learned at school or in the classroom, and then the cycle continues and you assess along the way. When you flip the classroom, those things are done a little differently. So perhaps the face-to-face instruction is more about the consolidation and checking the progress, while the self-study and the things that are done away from the instruction are where the real learning takes place. And this is what we're going to talk about for the rest of today. How do we turn that around for our current global situation, and how do we make it easier for ourselves and our students to teach and learn what we need to do? So the two ways that we're going to look at this are by looking at offline and online. And for today's purposes, when we refer to offline, we're mostly going to be talking about the material that is in the print or the ebook when the ebook is offline, and that these things can be assigned as self-study or practice. And then when we talk about the online, we're referring to a digital or an online class or an online activity. It doesn't have to be a class, or any kind of thing where your students together or your students with you are collaborating to do all of that consolidation and assessment. So another question for you. If you think about this idea of flipping the classroom, whether you already do this or not, or whether you may have to do this in the near future, can you think of any challenges you might face when doing this? Can you write any ideas that you have into the chat box? What are things that you might find a little bit unusual, a little bit more challenging than your normal planning when thinking about flipping the classroom? I'll give you a minute or two for that.
Okay, so we've had some answers coming in. Students' motivation and involvement, the fact you can't actually see them face to face. It's time consuming. Some students don't go over the material. And yeah, difficulties getting students to study on their own, less concentration, and focus, failure to complete tasks thoroughly. Yeah, lots around self-regulation and motivation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, definitely very valid points and things that I'm hearing a lot and that we're hearing a lot from teachers all over. So yeah, I totally agree with all of those things, and we're not going to be solving all of those issues today, but hopefully we can go towards giving you a couple of ideas, or at least get you started on thinking how you might approach some of those things. I mean, I can relate to all of them. It's very, very difficult, and I find even giving these kind of webinars are very difficult. And I totally agree with whoever said that. The face-to-face part is really hard. You can't see who you're talking to. It's difficult to teach like that, right? It's difficult to gauge reactions and things. So totally understand. Okay, so taking those challenges that you've just mentioned on board, are there any others here that maybe are additional to those? Let's have a look. So, in addition to those things that you've already mentioned, teachers need to think about, when teachers are planning classes in this way, in terms of blended learning and perhaps teaching a little part of it online, teachers need to think a little bit harder about what they need to teach versus what students can do on their own. And I think this is where this online offline part that we're going to distinguish today is going to come in and help you just to separate out a little bit before you even start planning. What are exactly those things, and how can we maximize them? How can we approach them so that we're really making the best of what we've got, right? Another challenge is that it's essential to have materials that you can use that are really flexible, you know, that you can use for different purposes, use for different students, and really take pieces of as much as you need to build whatever it is that you need to make your classes work. Teaching of the same content that you might teach in a classroom generally might take quite a lot longer when teaching online. We have to allow for all of these things that you've just mentioned, some of which may be things that appear in the classroom anyway, right? I mean, in the classroom face-to-face, we still have issues with students focusing, with motivation. That's nothing new to us as teachers, but those are things perhaps multiplied or magnified when doing this kind of work. So definitely we have to allow extra time for the preparation that we need to do and work out how we're going to fill in those gaps. And of course, maintaining constant balance of skills and test prep knowledge. It's a lot easier perhaps in a face-to-face situation to kind of teach in a way where you can build layers into things and maybe teach multiple things at once. As we just said, a lot of the online teaching that we do takes a lot longer to get the messages across and to make sure that our students are progressing. So getting that balance of English skills and test prep knowledge is naturally going to be more difficult and take a bit longer as well. So I keep harping on about this online and offline, what to do and when. What am I talking about specifically when I'm talking about this? So use your materials and your time wisely. Start by using what you know to begin with. Excuse me. Managing unfamiliar technology or tools takes time and practice, and you need to be patient with your students and with yourself. There's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of free things that you can use, and we'll mention a few of them today. But start by using what you know, what you're comfortable with, and then build up to things that are a little bit more progressive and maybe a little bit more out there. For test prep purposes, you need to look at offline as learning and consolidation activities. So that's where you're going to have your self-study and your detail and your granular, looking at the test knowledge and what your students need to know. When you are online with them, whether it's a classroom or whether it's an activity that you're doing online together, that's where you get the interaction, the feedback, and those productive skills, right? That speaking and writing that you said is the most difficult. There's no reason why that has to suffer from blended learning or from not being face-to-face with your students. There's lots of ways to use the time together with the students to use it as productively as possible, and we'll look at that a little bit later on. And also make sure the materials that you have fit yours and your students' blended needs. You're going to have to give your students a lot more guidance, a lot more support than you might in the face-to-face classroom situation. So that's something to consider as well. So a little bit of a look at this, online versus offline. So the offline, first of all, these kind of tasks should self-study, as I've already said. They should look at the test and the section structure. So whether it's general or specific, whether it's tiny details, whatever it is, this is where the students are going to get into the nitty-gritty, and you need to plan for them to look at that with a sufficient time to do that learning on their own. And I know that a lot of you have mentioned the motivation and also the ability to study on your own, right? Not everybody has that ability innately, and that's absolutely fine. But in this situation, you're going to have to find ways to help your students through that. And of course, with the materials that you have, make sure that they help you as well. You're going to have to enable the skill development. So offline, this is where students will look at their grammar, their vocabulary, do all that real active work to making sure that they're improving that as well. And start to practice on their own and consolidate their knowledge a little bit as they go. And then online, you need to plan tasks that review and consolidate everything, that support and give concrete enabling skills practice, lots of productive practice, as we said, and all of that assessment part that I've mentioned. So I've said a lot of things about online, offline, and I'm going to go into a little bit more concrete examples now of how we might do this with certain materials. And I'm going to use the Practice Test Plus as an example, just because it's freshest in my mind and we've just launched it, and it's really, really flexible, so it gives you a really good idea of how this might work. So thinking about offline practice, so again, this is the self-study where students use materials to do all of that hardcore work on their own. Practice Test Plus is really flexible in that it has lots of different kinds of information all the way through. So it has 5 complete practice tests focused on PTE General, and some of them are not ready tests and some of them are ready for tests. That doesn't mean that they're ready to take the test, it just means that they're ready to do a little bit more of that extra practice. So tests 1 and 2 offer the not ready guidance and scaffolded support. So you have in test 1 and test 2 a lot more extra activities and a lot more information around each part of the test to help your students work through it. And in test 1, as you can see here, you have complete overviews to every part of the test. So in test 1, you have these things which are how to do section, and you have a training section. The how to do section gives you a complete overview of what comes in that section of the test, what's being tested, what can you do to do well at it. And then you have, for the first test, for each of the sections, you have a whole bunch of exercises that walk you through that section. So the student can actually really do this on their own. Really do this on their own, really walk it through. Of course, you can go through with it afterwards on the online part of the teaching. This is the part where they're really, really scaffolded by the material itself, and it's really easy for them to do it. Test 2 is a little bit lighter now on the guidance that they get. So they don't have those how-to training pages anymore, but throughout test 2, you have these kind of tip strips that you can see here. And each section question has its own tip strip. And this basically is a little bit of, well, it's tips basically, but it's kind of questions around the question. So it guides the student to kind of think about the question, what might help them to find the right answer. It doesn't give them the answers, but it certainly guides them along the way. So it's kind of a little bit less than test 1, but it's helping them along the way. And then tests 3 to 5 are clean tests where they just get to practice. So again, still talking about the offline and all of that deep nitty-gritty work that they need to do. Each of the levels has lots of extra information in the back of the book to support the students. So they have a writing bank, a speaking bank, and a grammar bank. And these are all specifically to each level and to the tasks that come in the earlier tests, 1 to 5. The student can work on them, they can look at useful language, they can get more tips on how to write or how to speak or what are good things to do and good not to do. And they have a whole reference bank for their level. So A2 has a complete reference bank of all the grammar that covers the A2 level and a little bit beyond. So they can practice that on their own and really refer to it and get some extra juicy practice in there. So this is really, again, for self-study and helps you direct those students to all that nitty-gritty that they need to know. Oops. And offline as well, these are the other tests that I told you about, the clean ones. You can see they don't have any guidance, it's just practice test pages for the students to do. So then we look at more offline self-study and online support materials. These are some of the things that come with the course. So we have videos, we have speaking test videos for each level. Teacher doing the test, of an examiner talking about the test, talking about all the things that happen in that level, and also on some of the things that the students in the videos talked about. We have an app that helps you to help students to practice their vocabulary, and it's related to the vocabulary that come in the tests in the book. And then we have Pearson, where you have lots of online resources, you have all your audio, lots of extra resources for teachers, for students to prepare for the test, quite a complete thing, and there's lots of things there that you can use. So I'm just going to take a little minute to show you, Sophie, if you can show this for us. This is a video from the B2 level of Practice Test Plus for PTE General, and it's a it's from a C1 level, and it's a student doing section 12 of the test. So Sophie, if you could line that up for us, that would be great.
Give me just a second. Oh, I'm having difficulties with the sorry, give me just a sec.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not able to make that work at the moment. What we can do is we can put no, we can't. I was going to say we can put it in the email that we send out after the session, but we can't do that.
Don't worry. Sorry, guys. We'll see if Sophie,
sorry.
Maybe we can show it again if we're able to.
Exactly. Leave it with me. I'll see if I'll work on it, and yeah, maybe we can show it. All right.
Okay. So you see, it happens to the best of us, technological problems, but we'll see if we can come back to it. If not, I can.
That's working.
Okay, let's play it then.
Well, it seems to have paused.
So start talking again and maybe it will come back. No?
Are you playing it from your presentation?
I'm not doing anything.
Oh. Okay. Okay, let's continue.
No,
yeah.
Let's come back to it later. Sorry guys, but we'll try and get you a link to some of those so that you can see it later. Anyway, skill focus, online and offline. So now let's talk a little bit about the specific skills that students need for PTE General, and some different ideas about how this online, offline, blended learning approach might work. So, for example, we're talking about listening ideas. You have here offline practice and online practice. So again, offline self-study, test section structure, skills, online practice, review, concrete, support, and assess. So I'm not going to read through these. I mean, you can, I will imagine you get emailed these slides at the end, and this will be recorded, so you'll be able to access this as well afterwards. So you have plenty of time to go through these, but these are just some different ways, just some suggestions of how you might want to do this. The same thing for reading. Ooh, did a bit too fast. Reading, and there's lots of different ways that you can work on reading, both offline and online. So you might want to assign some of the paper tasks in the book for students to review at home. You might want them to have them work on some of the bank stuff. There's lots of resources that go around the videos as well. So there's worksheets for both the speaking and the writing videos. You might want to have them while at home. Lots of different things that you can do. So there's reading ones, writing ones, again to do with the worksheets. And this is a really interesting one actually, because there's lots of ideas here that you can use for students to do self-study that is also collaborative. So there's things like online collective writing. Perhaps after you've had students look at some of the test section and detailed guidance, work through some of the information, maybe they've done some of the practice tests and some of those test 1, test 2 tasks, you might want to have them kind of start doing stuff together, but it doesn't necessarily have to be part of a classroom situation. So you might want to have them work on things like group Google Doc activities, lots and lots of ideas out there online for things that they can do online together, which really brings in that collaborative part that we were talking about earlier, but it doesn't necessarily have to be done in a classroom situation. And that frees up your chance to have them do the productive thing, have them get all of that practice, which you can then evaluate separately, and then use the class time with them to really go through it, rather than having them spend that time doing those tasks when it's the precious time that you need to be actually back and forthing with the students. So lots of things you can do here: peer assessment, group blogging, individual online journals or shared journals, lots and lots of things that you can have them do. Speaking, so this is where really all of those resources would come in. So again, this is a little bit more detail for speaking here, just some ideas again. So you have the offline practice and the online practice. So if you're speaking with your students, if you're using Practice Test Plus, you might want to assign some of the study activities. You might want to, excuse me, you might want to have them look at the tips in Test 2 and do the activities that way. Then have them work on the videos with the worksheets. And you've gone then from the very, very detailed to the more general and had them work on those things in a progressive way. And then at the same time, when you're having that online sharing part, you could look at the activities that you want to do where they're sharing. You can use lots of the other videos, the examiner videos, really as a kind of test. You can use them to test their understanding. In a lot of those videos, they're set up so that the examiner is answering a question. So you could even have them, you know, work on the question in the classroom situation and then clear up any doubts that they have and all that kind of thing. So they're really, really flexible. You can use them in any way that you would like. Use that classroom online time to review the most important tips, check what they're doing, answer their questions, and do all of those kind of feedback activities. And of course, use the test videos in class as well. You can look at them, have them find areas for improvement. You can have them do group activities where they analyse what those students are doing, and then maybe do those activities themselves so that you can see their progression and how they're doing. So lots of different ways to use the same material, the speaking worksheets and speaking videos, in very different ways. And again here, just some extra ideas on how to practice speaking online. So you could do things, I mean, I know that you guys are teachers, you have lots of ideas, but these are just suggestions, things that you can have students do, and things that sometimes is a balance between things that are just speaking activities where you get to listen. It's very important when you're doing the digital thing as well to maybe have them record their performances that can help you quite a lot often with the assessment part, because you have something to help you fall back on and go back and look at and actually assess. But also a lot of collaborative work and some different ideas there for how they can work together. Okay, so let's take a moment before we get to the end of our presentation today to look at virtual feedback and assessment. And I've just popped this little quote in here from Diane Conrad. If you don't know, this book is really, really interesting, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in this topic of assessment. But I'll just give you a couple of seconds just to read this, read what she says. So I just popped this in here as something a little bit fun. I actually really like this quote, and I think it has a lot to do with what we're talking about today. I think generally in education now, and certainly in terms of test prep, we're moving away from assessment being this concrete thing where it's right or wrong, correct or incorrect. It has to be much more of a fluid thing, right? So in terms of blended learning, we need to look at assessment as something that is continuous and something that really, really supports the students in those challenges that you mentioned earlier. So things around the motivation, the ability to study alone. The assessment actually is part where you can really give them that feedback and really help them. So in terms of virtual feedback in this blended world, it really, really has to be even more rich and detailed than it does at any other time. So the kind of activities that you're having them do, those collaborative things where they're producing things that you can look at later and feedback on, they're really, really important because they can allow you to give that extra feedback to the students. So yeah, as I've said, potentially more of that is needed. You also need to think very carefully when you're planning about how peer-to-student feedback will work and when it won't work, and how it is useful in this environment. I think a lot of us as teachers are quite used to using that in the classroom. We're quite used to having students work together and feedback to each other, because we know from experience that it's a very valid way of having students learn, and they quite often learn very differently from each other, let's face it, than they do from the teacher, right? It's a very different experience. So we can use that in this blended approach, but we need to plan it a lot more carefully. It's not going to have the same results magically as it would in the classroom, and we'll look at how just touch on briefly how that might work. Setting expectations is very, very important. Frequent grading milestones, so even though we're not relying on the concrete yes or no answers, yes they're doing well, yes they're not, just from a grade, it's very important that they get that feedback, because that can help with that motivation as well. And feedback should be written as well as verbal if possible. Research shows that when we're doing things, the way that we listen and the way we interact with it is not necessarily the same as when it's in a classroom. So we really need to make sure that any feedback we give to students is written as well as verbal through a blended classroom situation. So, virtual feedback and strategies. We need to have a balance between identifying challenges and needs and on-the-go assessment. So what do I mean by that? So, you know, a lot of you will do these things in the classroom anyway, but again, they're even more vital in a blended learning situation. So constant kind of collaboration with the students, feedback, back and forth, how are they doing? If you have in the centre of your planning all the time that the students are doing a lot of self-study, that implicitly means that they're going to need a lot more, you're going to need to search a lot more for the information from them to find how they're doing. So things like weekly surveys, videos, short presentations, lots of sample answers, lots of things and assessments where you can identify the concepts that students are struggling with are really, really important. Things like fact check quizzes, pop quizzes, checklists, polls, exit cards, quizzes, any of those things, really just all the time to make sure that you know how they're progressing really, and you can do it in such a way that it's fun and they don't even notice sometimes that you're assessing them. It does take a little bit of work and a little bit more planning on your part, but you'll find the fruits of it are quite beneficial. So that's one thing. And then there's the on-the-go assessment. What do I mean by on-the-go assessment? So these are things that are continuous, and rather than just popping up all the time, they're things that are just kind of rolling along in the background. And this is really important for prep for PTE General anyway, because it's a real world test and it's testing their skills of English in the real world and real situations. It's really good practice anyway for PTE General to have students doing these kinds of things, but especially if you're teaching through a blended approach, these will really help them to keep that language practice going and do it in a way that's functional, maybe with activities that they would do in the real world anyway. And that continuous activity will help you see what they're doing as well and help them to see progress. So if they're doing discussion boards or they're doing these things that go on for a long time, you can then make points in it where you go back and have them look at what they did before, and it's quite obvious for them to see where they have progressed. So it's a really good way to assess and also have them self-assess, because they can see where they were and 6 months later what they're writing in their journal or whatever it is. So lots of different ways to approach it. Again, it does take a little bit more planning, but if you can plan these things really carefully through the prep, you can get a really good picture of how the students are progressing. Okay, so assessment and evaluation, regular performance assessments are essential. So this is what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned those productive skills, speaking and the writing that we know students find difficult. We know that that's probably for most students around the world, actually, some of the hardest parts of English in general, and certainly high stakes tests. So these kind of things could be live, they could be pre-recorded, whether it's audio, whether it's video. I know there's some restrictions in some countries around doing that, so of course you have to think about what you're able to do. Things that you can monitor, anything that you can give feedback on, or that has language rules that you can assess on is really, really important. And assessment feedback needs to be immediate, clear and consistent, and backed up with that written feedback that we talked about. Excuse me. And that might include things like selected response quizzes. There's loads of tools out there that we can use nowadays that are free. Lots of things like SurveyMonkey or different free online, just free online resources that you can use to get some actual collated feedback on your students and their answers and how they're feeling about things. And you can even make it anonymous so that they want to give you better answers. So that's quite good as well. So we've come to the end of the presentation and we've got about 10 minutes left. I was just wondering if anybody had any questions. So if you've got any questions about what we've been talking about today or something else around this course, please leave in the chat box and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible.
While everyone is thinking about their questions for you, I've worked out how to access the video. It has to be you, Jo, that does it. So as you're the presenter. So if you click on the sharing section on your panel.
Okay.
Should be the top in the list on your panel.
Where it says file and stuff? Oh, sharing, yeah. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so open that up, and then there's the first button has a little drop down arrow underneath it, screen. If you drop it down, it should have the option to show the video.
Okay, so while you're thinking of your questions, I'll play the video. It's only about a minute long, so it won't take very long. Oh, no. It says that I can't show it.
Oh dear. Okay, it wasn't meant to be.
I've watched this video 3 times now and not been able to show it. Sorry guys, we'll try and get it to you afterwards.
Okay, so some questions. We had a couple of questions come in anyway. What's the suggested time to cover the content of the Practice Test Plus materials? Well,
actually, that's the beauty of the Practice Test materials, Practice Test Plus, sorry, for PT General and for the other courses that we do it for as well, is that because it's not fixed courseware, you can actually mould it to the amount of time that you need or that you have. So you can actually, if you prepare it with enough materials and use the that come with the book carefully, you can stretch it out over a year or even longer if you want to. If you need to do it quickly and very, very quickly, you can do that as well. It really is so flexible because it doesn't come with lesson plans and it's not structured in a way that you have to do a certain amount of content at any time. So you could even, in fact, have different students in a class working at a different pace. If you think that some students have more capability to do the test sooner than other students who maybe need a little bit more time, in the same blended approach with the same class, you could have students potentially taking the test earlier than others. So it really is flexible. There is no suggested time period. It really depends how you use the book.
Great. What's your advice for inexperienced teachers? Any special resources to guide them that you can recommend?
So with this courseware, there are some teachers' resources which are actually really good for new teachers, which are available on the portal. So there's lots of things around teaching ideas for the test, and they're split into sections. So you have different games, different activities, and they kind of go through the skills that the students need to master for each section, and then gives you some ideas. So it's not a massive thing, but it's a bit of a good resource to get you started. And there's lots of other things there as well around scoring, and there's lots of other things that can help the teachers. I think there are some other resources available as well that are being developed. If you want to contact either one of us or you want to contact your local rep and they get in touch with me, I can get that information soon.
Super. There's a question here specifically about grade 1 and 2 students. Do these books help those grades?
I'm not sure what you mean by grade 1 and 2. I guess that depends what country you're in.
Younger students, yeah. So younger students, and somebody else has asked about teenagers.
Okay, so as PTE General is quite a wide exam, so obviously PTE General can be taken by people who are quite young, or also, you know, adults. It could be taken by somebody in the late 50s if they wanted to take it. It's a very general English test. So the courseware that we have, the PTG Practice Test Plus courseware, is actually designed to be kind of flexible for everybody. Obviously the lower levels are focused on younger students, right? So I think that the A2 level that we have could probably be taken, it depends again on the country. Different countries have different kind of approaches, and obviously if students are more bilingual or not, it makes a difference. But A2 generally could be taken by students from 12 to 14 upwards. It's general enough that it would be able to be suitable for them. And then as you go through the levels, it progress, and obviously C1 is quite a high level of English to be for older teenage students.
That's great. There's a question here about a little bit outside of this courseware in particular, but somebody's asking, how should a teacher speak to students after an exam if they've had a bad result? How can we kind of bring their motivation back up and get them ready to try again?
Yeah, it's always a tricky one, right? I mean, that motivation piece is so unpredictable, I guess. It's really, really hard. I think the most important thing is to find out from them, first of all, where they think they went wrong, where they think that they need support. Of course, let them know that it's not unusual to not do well in a test. It happens, right? It's part of life. It's part of living and being and studying English, I guess. But yeah, find out where they feel they have gone wrong, because sometimes we may think we know, but actually they might have a different idea. And work with them to build that special attention, that special plan, if you like, for them to try and improve. That's what I would do. But yeah, definitely talk to them about it and plan it with them. Plan it with them, because you might be surprised about what they think they need as well.
Yeah, very true. I think we've kind of made it through most of the questions here. Lots of lovely feedback. Jo, thank you for your time and your you know, your thoughts on this. Really interesting and detailed and insightful, and I'm sure will be useful to lots of people around the world as they're preparing their students for their exams. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everybody. Thanks to everyone for attending as well, putting up with our technical issues. We got there in the end. I hope you found it useful. Please do have a look at the rest of the assessment summer sessions webinar program. It's on our website. There's still a few sessions to go. It finishes on the 8th of September, every 1 week. So please do have a look, sign up for some more, and thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.